Hello lovely people, welcome to another book chat, the regular roundup of stuff I've read at some point in my past. Got another chunk of books to talk about this week, I'm just going to dive in.
Sophie Vlogs.
I'm going to kick things off with my fiction. This is Utopia Avenue by David Mitchell. I have read David Mitchell before. I went through a phase probably like 5 to 10 years ago now, time flies, where I read quite a few David Mitchell quite quickly, and I got a bit tired of him. And I had some books that really worked for me, and then others that just like did not work for me at all. So I in my head I had gone, I don't read David Mitchell anymore. I've done that. I've moved beyond it. This book came out. I was really intrigued by this book, and people who I trust really liked it. So Matt at MCS Books is a big David Mitchell fan anyway, so I would have known that he would have liked this anyway. But Charlie at Charles Heathcote also really enjoyed it, and I thought to myself, this is the David Mitchell that is most likely to appeal to me. Let's give it a go. I have this lovely edition, which is Waterstones exclusive, which has this lovely cover, and then when you take it off, it has like yellow, and then these little end papers, and I was like, look, Sophie, just go for it. This is set in the 60s. It covers about a year of time, and you're essentially following like the rise of this band called Utopia Avenue, and it's. I had a fun time. I didn't wholly love it, but I did end up giving this 4 out of 5 stars because I just enjoyed it enough that I was like, yes. First of all, it was very interesting just as like a snapshot of this moment. There are like 4 band members within this band, and you follow different perspectives as you like go through. If you don't like the characters, I don't think you'll like this book, because you do spend a lot of time like rooted in the characters and like how they're viewing the world and their like own personal like things they have going on and that kind of thing. I didn't necessarily like all of the characters, but I enjoyed reading about their journeys, which is sometimes like a distinction, isn't it? Like Dean Often, I didn't wholly like him as a person, but he was interesting as a character to me, is what I'm saying. I enjoyed sort of like being immersed in this particular moment in time. Sometimes it worked better for me than others, so I enjoyed like being immersed in the time. There are like cameos from ridiculously famous people, which is often something that doesn't wholly work for me. When they were at their best in this is when I think they were really used in ways that really helped cast a light on where our characters were at, rather than moments when they were just sort of like, oh, and then I walked out and then David Bowie was on the stairs and then I had a conversation with David Bowie and blah, 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 except for he wasn't David Bowie yet because no one knew who he was. So that aspect was just like, I felt like there could have been less cameos, I think is what I'm saying. Like, I think if they had been less of them and they just stuck to the ones that actually helped the plot and helped character development, that would have worked a bit better for me. But on the whole, I really enjoyed this look at this like rise and fall of this band, and the like how hard it is to make it in the industry, and the different challenges they all face based on different like aspects of their identity, like being a woman, being working class, like being queer, like all of these things. So I really enjoyed that. There was like a moment in this, I knew at some point this was going to go a bit wibbly wobbly, because I was like, it's David Mitchell, I was expecting it. Didn't wholly work for me. There was a plotline to do with Jasper and the state of his mental health, and essentially like we moved from a point of it being like a mental illness into a point of it being something a bit beyond the laws of our reality. And that in itself wouldn't have inherently bothered me. What bothered me is that whole section, essentially, I realised that it ties into a different one of his books, but I've not read that book. So I was annoyed because I felt like we were having a perfectly enjoyable time with like this rise and fall of a rock band kind of thing, and then we just went into a wibbly wobbly place, but not even a place that makes sense to me as a reader because I don't know what they're referencing. It felt like the conclusion to a different book that had been put into this book, and I resent the fact that I'm supposed to have read his entire catalogue for that really to work for me. So for me, that felt like an unnecessary jump out of the narrative into something that I've not previously been given any context for, and then we just go back into the narrative, and I was like, what? But on the whole, I will say that actually, like, I'm really glad to have picked up David Mitchell again, and I think sometimes, like, there are times that work for reading authors. I think potentially the reader I am now is better suited to reading David Mitchell books than the reader I was when I first read some of them. Next up is a book that I read on my Kindle, and that is The Hatmakers by Tamzin Merchant. We follow Cordelia and her family. She comes from a family of hat makers. Essentially, in this world, there are guilds, and there's like hat makers and boot makers, and they are able to like make these hats that imbue them with magic based on the materials that they use, to like encourage, like, do you need more confidence, do you need a cool head, like these kind of things. Like, they will make you the appropriate hat. This is very much like a historically infused book. Like, we're kind of in like a sort of vaguely Georgian setting. The king appears to be going mad, war with France looms on the horizon, and someone appears to be trying to like get to the guilds and like break them up. I really ended up loving this book. It's one of those books where actually there were many times in the plot where I predicted what was going to happen, but I didn't mind because I so enjoyed the telling of it. And you know, like, this is a middle grade book, this is designed for children. I'm coming in as an adult reader, so obviously sometimes I'm going to be reading these plot cues, or I'm going to be using like logic to be like, well, if this is happening, it's got to be one of these characters that I've already been introduced to, so my money is on X, and that kind of thing. So that's not a criticism, and it's actually a compliment, because even though I knew where this was going to go at some points, I so enjoyed going there because I just think she writes so beautifully. Her ways of describing things, like the metaphors she uses, the imagery she evokes, I just think this was such like a magical, wonderful time. I also think it was done well. Like I mentioned, like the king appears to be going mad. Like, that's not something that is dealt with in like using the mental illness as like a shock factor kind of thing. It's something that I felt was dealt with like nuance and that kind of thing, which I really appreciated. And I had a lovely time. I would definitely read more things that Tamzin Merchant publishes. The final fiction book I want to talk about I read on my phone on Libby, and that is A Faux Love Story by Lo and Lei. This follows Bao and Lin. Their parents have rival Vietnamese restaurants that like directly face each other, and they have always been told growing up that they cannot associate with each other. They like hate each other, but they have no idea why their parents hate each other. This is kind of a loose retelling of Romeo and Juliet insofar as like Bao and Lin start to like get to know each other, like a bit of a romance forms, and they still don't know why their families aren't allowed to associate. I had a lovely time reading this. First of all, the descriptions of food in this book are so mouth-watering. It made me want to go and just it made me want to eat so many foods, and especially because like it was describing a lot of foods that I've never personally eaten, but the way that they are described, I could understand what they would taste like, what they would like texturally be like, and that kind of thing. So that was just a delightful aspect of it. I thought the romance aspect was sweet. It felt very gonna be like age appropriate. I just mean sort of like the way that they interacted with each other and that kind of thing. The thing I really liked about it is I really liked seeing how both characters sort of found themselves, or rather they like start off in different places. So Lynn knows who she is, she's an artist, but her parents don't want her to be an artist because her parents have gone through such a struggle to get to America that they want her to do something that she won't have to struggle with, which, and being an artist is associated in their head with like struggling and financial insecurity and that kind of thing. So she has her own struggle that is to do with getting them to understand that about her, and just trying to decide, like, does she listen to her parents? Does she keep being an artist? Like, what do you do? Whereas Bao is different because he doesn't know what he wants, and he really goes through a journey of this, of finding what it is that he is good at, but not even that he is good at, that he loves to do. And I really enjoyed seeing him develop on that, because I think that's something that is very easy to connect to, not knowing what you want to be or do. And not having a sense of direction, and then how do you go about finding that? And yeah, so on the whole, this was just like a sweet, fun time. The final two books I'm going to talk about very quickly because I'm running out of camera battery. First up is Left Bank, Art, Passion and the Rebirth of Paris, 1940 to 1950 by Agnes Poirier. I really enjoyed this because I didn't know anything about these people, like existentialism and that kind of thing. I know some of the names, but I know nothing about, like, I didn't even know what existentialism really was. I'm not sure if I still do. I kind of do. I don't know. This goes through, like, in time, like, chronologically. She's introducing you to a lot of names, but I think she does a really good job of, that never felt overwhelming to me. I always felt like I kind of knew who the people were when she's referencing them, and I just think that narratively this was done in a way that felt like being taken through a narrative, and that was a really great way to sort of get your head around the names, the ideas, the movements, that kind of thing. I ended up really enjoying it. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, and it's definitely introduced me to sort of a moment in time that I've never really read anything from. Like, it's even just the perspective at the start when they're in occupied France. I have read quite a lot of books about World War II by now, fiction and non-fiction, and it was an interesting perspective to be having it from the perspective of these people who are living in occupied France but who are still trying to create art and that kind of thing. So I really enjoyed this. And then finally is Bloodline, The Celtic Kings of Rome and Britain by Miles Russell. This was lent to me by my partner. This develops the theme that southern Britain was not so much conquered by Rome as liberated. He's essentially really challenging a lot of the ideas we have about Celtic culture and the Roman occupation of Britain. And number one, it was surprisingly funny. He's quite snarky at times, and it made me giggle. And number two, it was just really interesting, like this concept of the creation of Britannia, and just like his reassessment of like Britain's like assimilation into Roman culture, and like all these sorts of things. Essentially, it is like based in a time period that I would previously have said that I probably knew a bit about, but actually like he's really challenging like things that we take as like accepted things, and pointing out when things are just assumptions, when things are just based on like one source that's not actually that reliable, and that kind of thing. So interesting for sure. That's everything I want to talk about in this week's book chat. I've probably rambled on for far too long, but I would love to hear your thoughts if you have any thoughts on any of these books. Otherwise, I hope you're having a lovely day, and I will see you next time for something different.